Boy, I was listening to Johnny Cash live at Folsom Prison yesterday. Little did I know I'd come to church today and be recorded like Johnny was recorded at that prison all those years ago. But I invite you, if you so desire, to now rise for the reading of the Gospel. The Holy Gospel according to St. Matthew. Glory to you, O Lord. Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and curing every disease and every sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them, because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore ask the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest." Then Jesus summoned his 12 disciples and gave them authority over unclean spirits to cast them out and to cure every disease and every sickness. These are the names of the 12 apostles. First, Simon, also known as Peter, and his brother Andrew, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew the tax collector, James son of Alphaeus and Thaddeus, Simon the Cananean, and Judas Iscariot, the one who betrayed him. These 12 Jesus sent out with the following instructions. Go nowhere among the Gentiles and enter no town of the Samaritans, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. As you go, proclaim the good news. The kingdom of heaven has come near. Cure the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons. You received without payment, so give without payment. Take no gold or silver or copper in your belts, no bag for your journey, or 2 tunics and sandals or a staff, for laborers deserve their food. Whatever town or village you enter, find out who in it is worthy, and stay there until you leave. As you enter the house, greet it. If the house is worthy, let your peace come upon it. But if it is not worthy, let your peace return to you. If anyone will not welcome you or listen to your words, shake off the dust from your feet as you leave that house or town. Truly, I tell you, it will be more tolerable for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah on the day of judgment than for that town. See, I'm sending you like sheep out into the midst of wolves. So be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. Beware of them, for they will hand you over to councils and flog you in their synagogues, and you will be dragged before governors and kings because of me, as a testimony to them and the Gentiles. When they hand you over, do not worry about how you are to speak or what you are to say, for what you are to say will be given to you at that time. For it is not you who speak, but the Spirit of your Father speaking through you. Brother will betray brother to death, and a father his child, and children will rise against parents and have them put to death, and you will be hated by all because of my name. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. When they persecute you in one town, flee to the next, for truly I tell you, you will have not gone through all the towns of Israel before the Son of Man comes. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. I'd invite you to be seated. Until health conditions improve, one of the crosses I'm going to bear is that I'm going to remain affixed to this pulpit. Affixed to this pulpit. If you know I customarily go about my business, you know that will be a cross for me to bear. But I will bear it, all for the sake of all of you. It's good to be back worshiping at 1000 Scalp Avenue, isn't it? Good, I agree. Since we were last here, I found myself going down memory lane a good bit. Right around the time that schools closed and then shelter-in-place orders began to emerge, I ran across a song that was recorded by the Byrds back in the 60s. Really struck a chord with me, and its first verse goes like this. I think I'm going back to the things I knew so well in my youth. I think I'm returning to the days when I was young enough to know the truth. Again, I think I'm going back to the things I knew so well in my youth. I think I'm returning to the days when I was young enough to know the truth. Given all that we've been through, I think you might understand why those words resonated with me. When life is falling apart all around you, when death and deep division and disorder are the day, it's only natural to want to go back to the more simplistic era of our childhood, right? If we were blessed with good parents, good neighborhood, good extended support system of family and friends, and I was blessed with all of that, the fact of the matter is that life is pretty simple and secure when you're a kid, unless you're a kid growing up in the midst of a global pandemic, right? Life was very, very simple back in those days, and when all hell breaks loose, it only makes sense that you'd want to go back to those simpler times. I've been doing it an awful lot. I don't even think about it, but it's happening all the time. One of the reasons this happened is because my godfather and I reconnected in the midst of all this. I interacted with him perhaps twice in my life. He lived in California, now he lives in Honolulu, and somehow through one of our YouTube videos, he tracked me down, he reached out, we've entered into conversation, and just the other day, he sent me my great-grandfather's naturalization papers. Pretty neat, going down memory lane. But this has been happening in other ways as well. I'll give you this example. On Friday night, I took myself and my dog Riley out for a walk. Like all the health experts in this congregation keep telling me I need to do if I want to shed any weight, I varied my walking route. I went down formerly untrod territory. Here's what happened. First unfamiliar corner, I took a pug, ran out at me and Riley. Walked a little bit longer, took another unfamiliar corner, and this prior incident repeated itself twice over. First, 2 little chihuahuas came running out at Ryla and me, and then the very next house, a big old St. Bernard named Maya was trying to drag its owner to the curb so that Maya might say hello. This all took me down memory lane. Back when I was a kid, we used to sometimes travel to the town where my father graduated from high school. If you want to look it up on a map, it's called Westfield, Wisconsin. And when we go to that town where my father graduated from, what do you think we do? We visit all his high school buddies who still live there, and one of them had a pug. A pug. And this pug was certainly combative enough that it lived up to the pug's relation to words like pugnacious and pugilistic. Now, when we weren't visiting Westfield, we'd sometimes go to another little burg called Rosendale. My dad's cousin Milo lived in Rosendale, and what kind of dog do you think Milo had? A Chihuahua. Starting to put this together, first pug, second Chihuahua, and here's the real kicker. Sometimes when I was a kid, we'd go out in the country towards Oshkosh, Wisconsin. You may recognize that name, Oshkosh Bagosh. We'd sometimes go out in the country towards Oshkosh, Wisconsin, towards a family farm where my mom's dad and mother met and fell in love. And guess what? When we go to that farm run by Harry and Lily Knocktraub, what sort of dog was on the property? A big old St. Bernard. Holy Maloney, even though decades have elapsed, there on Friday night I was reliving a circuit I traveled in my youth. Pug, Chihuahua, St. Bernard. I think I'm going back to the things I knew so well when I was young. I think I'm returning to the days when I was young enough to know the truth. Do you agree? I wonder why. Why is this happening? I think I've answered the question in some ways. When life becomes more complicated and complex than it is when we're learning how to ride a bike or tie our shoes, what do we want to do when that complexity and that chaos emerges? Go back to those days when we were learning how to ride a bike or tie our shoes. This can be both positive and negative. Let's start with the negative. When we run from the present and back to our past, it can be a form of escapism. We can sometimes, when we do this, want to make today yesterday. And is that going to work? Can you make today yesterday? It's impossible. It's a waste of time. You can't do it. And yet I think we live at a time when many in our society are trying to make today yesterday. Is any level of screaming and hollering going to make today yesterday? It's not going to work. Even Jesus said, worry not about tomorrow, worry about today. For today's got its own problems and tomorrow's going to have its own problems. Running back to the past to escape the present is dangerous. We don't want to do it. But just because returning to the past can be a form of escapism, doesn't mean it necessarily has to be that kind of thing. Traveling back between now and the days of our youth can simply remind us of how long we've lived, thanks to God's grace. Traveling back between June 14, 2020, and say the day of my baptism on January 28, 1968, reminds me that I've been around a long time, thanks to God's grace. And that's a pretty good reminder, isn't it? It is. And I think this is the reminder issued by today's reading from Genesis. Coming from the book of Genesis, it's probably no surprise that this reading, a reading about beginnings, takes us back to the early youth of the church. You've got Abraham and Sarah, who seem to have no future because they have no heir, and you've got a church that seems to have no future because the church lives or dies with Abraham and Sarah's capacity to have an heir. Things do not look good. These two are senior citizens. Sarah is well beyond the biological age when procreation is possible. Looks like the church is dead. Dead as a doornail. The church seems to be so dead that what does Sarah do when she hears three divine messengers predict that the church is going to have a future and that she and Abraham are going to have a future? What does she do? She laughs. She laughs. But because God is a God of grace, this laughter, this mockery, does not stop God from going ahead anyway. Just as promised, a year later, Abraham and Sarah have a kid, and the church therefore has a future. What does this tell us? 3,900 years ago, all the way up to the present, the church's existence has never been about us getting it right. The church's existence has always been about God's unending grace and love. And if we've been around 3,900 years, in spite of the somewhat sparse turnout this first weekend back, do you think the church has a future? No, it's been 3 months since we've been together, folks. I'm deafer than I was before. If we've been around for 3,900 years, do you think the church still has a future?
Yes.
And do you think we still have a future?
Yes.
Do you think there's going to be a forgiveness of sin, a resurrection of the body, and a life everlasting?
Yes.
You can bet on it. We're always going to be around because God's grace, God's love don't end. So if you're worried about your future, about the church's future, don't worry. God's got your back. Amen? Hallelujah. But just because God has assured our short-term and immediate and long-term future doesn't mean that we can just sit on the bench. We may not be the senior player here, but we are the junior player, and we can play a role in the quality of our future. This reminds me of something I once heard a Lutheran theologian say. He was speaking to a bunch of Lutherans, and do you know what he compared the church to? A cockroach. He said the church is like a cockroach. You can't get rid of it. The church is like a cockroach. You can't get rid of it because God's love is here to stay. Same thing I just got done telling you. But here's the other side of that analogy. Is it exactly a compliment to be compared to a cockroach? Do you want me from this point forward to stop addressing you as Paul Bergman and call you Cockroach Bergman? Is that what you want me to do? I highly doubt it. Cockroaches are ugly creatures. Cockroaches are a royal nuisance. I didn't know that growing up in the state of Wisconsin. There weren't many cockroaches there. But let me tell you, when I went to Fort McClellan, Alabama in the summer of 1986 to do basic training, I learned all about cockroaches. You'd go and take a shower, And guess what might be climbing on the wall or around your feet? A cockroach. You'd go into the toilet stall to do your business, and guess what you might see crawling around your feet or crawling up a wall? A cockroach. And folks, these were not northern cockroaches. These were southern cockroaches. They were 1 inch, 2 inches long. Cockroaches are ugly. They are a royal nuisance. To compare the church to a cockroach is not exactly a compliment. But the reality is, sometimes the church can be as ugly as a cockroach. And frankly, even before COVID-19, we were living through some pretty ugly days in the life of the church. There were sex scandals, payoffs, cover-ups. Pretty or ugly? Ugly. There was an increasing propensity to pick up my marbles and go home when I don't get my way. Ugly or beautiful? Ugly. And lately, there has been a very unfaithful attempt to try to fuse someone's politics and the Bible with politics being put in first place. Ugly or beautiful? Ugly. Ugly, ugly, ugly. Folks, I just have to tell you, some of the things supposed Christians are saying would be laughed at in the classrooms where Pastor Jonathan and I were educated. They are unfaithful. They are ugly. They turn the church into a pariah. So one of the things we have to decide here at Mount Calvary Lutheran Church is, are we going to fight back against this? Are we going to be an ugly cockroach? Or are we going to be a continuing inspiration? Which do you want to be? Cockroach or continuing inspiration? And folks, we've been that in recent weeks. Even up to this day, I continue to receive letters in the mail and emails about how our church was the hero of this community when it held worship at the Silver Drive-In on Easter Sunday and again on Mother's Day. Our reputation in this community is pretty good right now, but what is now can quickly go away, right? Are we going to be cockroach or continuing inspiration? Say a butterfly, a blue sky, or a songbird. Which is it going to be? It's largely going to be up to us. Our youth, the days of our youth tell us that the practice of hospitality is going to be key. Why did we learn all those wonderful lessons we learned in our childhood? The answer is pretty simple. We practiced hospitality. We welcomed parents and teachers and other role models into our lives, and these welcome guests made quite a difference over time, didn't they? But you don't get the treasures of childhood without that sort of hospitality. And here's the kicker. God continues to send us these sorts of wonderful messengers, no matter how old we are or no matter how far or wide we travel. The question is, are we going to be ready to welcome these new messengers? Abraham was ready to welcome 3 divine messengers who ultimately told him the first church had a future. Are we going to be ready to welcome those messengers who have come our way and will continue to come our way? The answer is going to be, if we don't, if we turn a deaf eye and ear to these messengers, we're going to be starts with a C, ends with an H, we're going to be a cockroach. But if we do welcome these messengers, we're going to be a continuing inspiration. Perhaps a butterfly, songbird, blue sky. Agreed? Practice of hospitality is going to be key. And let me travel back to the days of my youth one final time. to illustrate this point for you. Like some of you, I'm old enough to remember when it was still not against the law to not wear a seatbelt. Can you remember those days when no cop in the country could pull you over and give you a ticket because you didn't have a seatbelt on? Remember those days? I think many of you do. When laws began to emerge saying that wearing a seatbelt was now legal, I was in conversation with an old, tough railroader of a neighbor who I loved, absolutely not loved, named Baldy Hawk. He was a wonderful man. He chewed 8 brothers long cut, and here's what would happen the whole time those conversations about seatbelts were going on. We'd be driving in his car, of course he'd have no seatbelt on, he'd chew his tobacco, and he'd pull out his little coffee can between his legs and he'd go, and then he'd say, "Kid, let me tell you something. These seatbelts are going to kill more people than they save. These seatbelts are going to kill more people than they save." I love the man. But was he right? He was dead wrong. Go to your doctor. Ask him the number one thing you can do to extend the length of your life. And you know what they'll tell you today? Wear a seat belt. How did we get there? Through the practice of hospitality. By being open enough to messengers who both confirmed and challenged our point of view that we could arrive at the truth, and by being humble in the process. You think we might want to teach our present society a thing or two about the practice of that kind of hospitality? Debbie Thomas here is waving her head, oh, big time. Folks, I'm going to tell you the truth in love. I've never seen such a mess as the one we presently find ourselves in. We have a country that's divided right down the middle, and both sides think they know a lot more than they think they know. Who needs to tell them to take it down a few notches and to practice hospitality? You and me? Yeah. Let's go do it. If we do, we'll be a continuing inspiration, not a cockroach. Good future? I think so. Amen.